560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
I appreciate your program. It's the best in the morning in Chicago.
On AM 560.
I just heard the most sane 60 seconds of analysis I've ever heard on this issue, so
thank you.
Well done, brother.
The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We have so many legal matters to pour over with Andy McCarthy, the border, the Russian collusion,
mask mandates,
vaccination
mandates.
But I want to start with the Rittenhouse trial, the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. There was yet another moment in this whole proceeding, from that night in Kenosha all the way to charges to trial, that makes this prosecution curious to me. There was one of the individuals that Kyle Rittenhouse encountered on that night, a guy named Gage Grosskretz, testified yesterday for the prosecution, but it seemed like he did more help for the defense. He admitted that he lied to police on several occasions, that he told officers after the shooting he dropped his firearm. That wasn't true. He admitted in court that he filed a $10 million lawsuit against the city of Kenosha and failed to mention he was armed when he was shot by Rittenhouse. Uh-huh. He said it's not true that he chased after Rittenhouse, but then he was shown a picture of him grabbing his handgun while running toward Rittenhouse.
And that he pointed his gun at Rittenhouse, and then Rittenhouse fired, and then the defense put his head in his hands.
Okay. He told police that he shouted to another individual to stop hitting Rittenhouse with a skateboard. He said, in hindsight, that's not true. And then this moment.
With your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Another hands up, don't shoot faux event. No, because it was all, he had his hands up and Rittenhouse shot him. No, he just admitted he was advancing. His hands weren't up at that point. His gun was drawn, and that's when Rittenhouse fired. What is the prosecution in Kenosha doing other than trying to serve certain political interests, I wonder? Pleased to be joined again by Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, former assistant U.S. attorney in Manhattan, and contributing editor to NRO, as well as author of the best-selling Ball of Collusion. Andy, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So, I mean, is that Grosskretz testimony to, if you'll excuse the phrase, a kill shot for the prosecution?
Well, they haven't had much go right for them from what I can detect, and I do think this is a very political prosecution. It's one where I don't think that professional prosecutors who were just applying the law would ever have brought this case. This was, obviously brought by political pressure, and I think their theory is one that ought to frighten people, because if they're correct about this, then you have to wonder what's left of self-defense, which is the natural right that undergirds the Second Amendment. And that is this idea that, let's put the first shooting aside, all the victims, so-called, that were shot after that, their theory is that even if they were not threatening, or even if they were threatening Rittenhouse, they were provoked by his first shooting, and they were trying to interrupt an active shooter. And that, number one, has no bearing whatsoever on whether Rittenhouse perceived a threat and was allowed to defend himself. But if it's right, then you have no right to self-defense anymore.
Well, and the other thing about this, they sort of argued in the alternative, at least a pre-trial, which is, and this is sort of the the non-legal argument that's out in the public arena. What was this 18-year-old doing with a rifle roaming the streets of Kenosha that night? Well, the response to that, it seems to me, is, well, wait a second. I mean, that city was up for grabs. The police had lost control of the city, so he's out protecting himself. Whether you think it's judicious or not for him to be, actively on the street, patrolling, if you will, or looking to provide aid and comfort to people that are under threat of violence, whether you think that's a smart thing or not, it's not illegal for him to do that.
Yeah, I also think it's the kind of thing, Dan, that a good judge would have kept out of the case. Like, for example, if you were accused of bank robbery, and I could prove that, on 2 other occasions you would been in the vicinity of stores that got robbed, but you weren't charged with that wouldn't be allowed in the case. And, it wouldn't be allowed in the case because you have to, if somebody is guilty, they have to be guilty on the elements of the things that are charged. You don't get to convict them because they were out doing something stupid or something that, you think is unwise and can't be explained. You can't convict them because on other occasions they did things that were condemnable. The only way you're supposed to be able to convict people is if you have proof beyond a reasonable doubt of the elements of the things that they're actually charged with. And if you charge someone with murder, then being an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old who was out on the street and shouldn't have had a gun, and that was an irresponsible set of choices, you can condemn that until the cows come home. It's got nothing to do with whether he committed murder.
I wanted to get your reaction as well to the progress that John Durham is making. You were right. I tweeted at you a few weeks back, is this thing going anywhere? And you said, stay tuned, hold your powder. Okay, I did, and you were right. And so after this number one subsource of Christopher Steele, Igor Danchenko, was indicted last week, and by the way, George Stephanopoulos' journalism credentials also indicted as an unindicted co-conspirator as far as I'm concerned. This is what John Solomon from Just the News had to say about where he thinks this is going.
There's no doubt there is activity inside the grand jury right now aimed at looking at top-level officials of the FBI, and it's based on this evidence. We all look at the fact that Danchenko was interviewed by the FBI January 17 and disowned a lot of the things that was said to him. A lot of people say that should have been the point where the FBI stopped. But Durham has developed really significant evidence that the red flags, the stop now warning signs, go all the way back to August when Bruce Orr in 2016 came to the FBI and said, Christopher Steele's dumping a dossier on you. He hates Trump. He's hired by Hillary Clinton, and most of his information is raw and uncorroborated. A month after that, the CIA sends a warning to the FBI. This is something John Ratcliffe declassified, saying Hillary Clinton is trying to play a dirty trick on Donald Trump and try to tie him to Russia collusion to get out of her email thing. Those are 2 major warning signs. And then all through the fall, they're keeping a spreadsheet of what's right and wrong in the Steele dossier, and it's all wrong. Can't corroborate. This is wrong. This is Russian disinformation. The FBI should never have started this investigation based on the warning signs. And I think that's where John Durham's investigation is focused right now.
And if that's where it's focused, then that necessarily has to ultimately get to the Strocks and the McCabe's and even the Comeys, doesn't it?
I think a lot of the detail that John laid out there is undoubtedly true, but what he's overlooking, which for people who want to see criminal prosecution against the government officials here, the problem with the analysis is what were the 2 people that Durham charged in the last 6 weeks? What were they charged with?
Lying to
they
the
were charged not with an overarching conspiracy to defraud the court, right? They were charged with lying to the FBI. So Durham's obviously operating on a theory that the FBI was duped, and you can't have it both ways. It can't be both that the FBI is in on it and the FBI is being fooled by these people who are bringing them information.
Yeah,
now,
but why did they let themselves get fooled? I mean, why didn't they do more due diligence on that?
I think, Amy, that you're hitting on what the main abuse of power problem is here, which is I think the FBI, especially at the highest echelon, was predisposed to believe that Trump was a bad guy and thought that if they investigated long enough, eventually the evidence would catch up with their predisposition. So when these people brought bogus information about Trump to the FBI, they were inclined to believe it because that it fit what their predisposition was. And it was like these people were pushing on an open door. And the pretext for all of this is that they liked Steele. You know, they had worked with Steele on another investigation when he was with the British government. So, you know, they decided not to look that hard at what he was bringing them. Now, it's all irresponsible, but it's why I think where this investigation is headed ultimately, you may see some more false statements kind of charges, but you're not going to see any bells and whistles, overarching fraud on the court conspiracy. I think where he's headed is a narrative report like the Mueller report, where he targets the Clinton campaign as kind of the root of all evil for these purposes, that they developed this Trump-Russia collusion narrative. They peddled it to the media, which was very willing, and to the FBI, which was predisposed to believe it. And then they used the fact that they successfully peddled it to argue to the electorate that Trump was not only a Putin stooge, but that it was likely he was under investigation by the government for being one. And I think that's where it's going.
Couldn't you, I mean, did Danchenko and Sussman have communication with McCabe or Comey?
I don't think so. Now, Sussman is talking to Baker, which is very high up. I mean, Baker is the general counsel of the FBI. Right. And Sussman also had a long career as a cyber security official in the Justice Department, so it wouldn't stun me if he had connections to McCabe, if not McCabe and Comey. But the one he's alleged to have dealt with directly is Baker, who he's also got a long-standing relationship with. I think Danchenko, but the most outrageous fact in the Danchenko indictment, which to my mind is getting very little attention and deserves a lot more, is that when the FBI goes to the FISA court to get a warrant, they bring the judges what's known as a verified application under oath. And it's called a verified application because they're supposed to corroborate their allegations before they go to court. And the fact is they didn't interview Danchenko, who is the source of everything, until January of 2017, even though they first went to the FISA court in October of 2016. So by the time they talked to the main guy they should have talked to before they ever went to court, they're now trying to get their second 90-day warrant. In fact, I think they may already have gotten it by the time they talked to Danchenko. So that's what's really irresponsible here. They didn't do any rudimentary corroboration that the FBI is supposed to do before they do something as really weighty as going to a secret federal court under oath to get spy warrants against an American.
Now, the reason I ask, though, is couldn't you lie to lower-level FBI officials and be indicted for lying to those officials, and yet be those lower officials being completely in the dark about what upper-level officials are doing, and upper-level officials having exposure if they were in some ways conspiring with the, as you say, the source of all of this, the Clinton campaign?
Yeah, I think the problem, Dan, with that theory is that looking at what we know that's been said publicly, Attorney General Barr said while he was back Attorney General, that neither Obama nor Biden were the subject of this investigation.
Right.
Brennan, the CIA director, was told before he was interviewed, according to the public reporting, that he was not a subject of the investigation. And all of the indictments there haven't been that many, but the ones that have been returned so far indicate that the FBI is in the dark about what they're being told. So when you read these indictments, which are very detailed in terms of their narrative, you're not getting a sense that there was pressure coming from above to push the investigation. That the people who were getting the information were duped. And remember, when Comey was on with Chris Wallace, he began to this is months ago, he really began to distance himself from the investigation, right? At one point, he acted like he knew everything that was going on, and now what he says is, well, that's 7 or 8 levels below me. I'm the director. I can't know every detail of every investigation.
All right.
So I think what you're going to see is a narrative report that hangs them out to dry as having been really abusive and irresponsible, but not necessarily criminal.
On the vax mandate issue with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals enjoining the implementation of the mandate, is sort of the conventional thinking on this what's going to play out here in short order? Some other circuit court will let it go. You'll have a conflict, and the Supreme Court will take this up and adjudicate the matter before Jan 4?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll happen before January 4. I hope it will. But I think what will happen here is the Fifth Circuit will slam the government because, there's administrative problems with this, there's statutory problems with it, and constitutional problems as well. But the Supreme Court has been kind of funky in these cases. There's been a majority of the court which seems to be predisposed to let the elected officials make the decisions here. And I've been alarmed by that because I think that they're given short shrift to the civil rights concerns, which have been raised, by the way, by Justices Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas. But so far, there seems to be, for the most part, other than the eviction moratorium case, a kind of a 6-3 majority of the court, which is basically saying this is for the elected officials who answer to the voters to work out. So it'll be interesting to see what the Supreme Court does with it.
Is there any question in your mind that it's the order is violative of federal statute as well as potentially the 10th Amendment?
Oh yeah, I think before you ever get to the constitutional issue, first of all, they're using an emergency provision that they're not treating it like an emergency. Biden announced this 2 months ago, and it goes into effect in 2 months. That's like saying, the three of us should have an emergency meeting on the radio, and why don't we schedule that for March?
There's no sense of urgency.
So I don't, before you even get to the constitutional part, and then I don't think that a virus is not a substance or agent under the statute. So I think they're going to have statutory problems. They shouldn't have done this on this emergency provision, which the courts don't like anyway. It's been overruled by the courts on 5 of 6 occasions where it's been litigated, and that's why they haven't even tried to do this since the 1980s. And here they're not treating it like an emergency. So that seems to me to be the layup issue here.
He is Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, former assistant U.S. attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor to NRO. And if you haven't, pick up his bestseller, Ball of Collusion. Andy, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Gunmaker Remington moving operations to Georgia. Elon Musk causes Tesla shares to plunge in value, and Thanksgiving countdown is on.